I'm your moderator, and this one, actually, the overarching question for this one is, what competencies do today's knowledge professionals need to lead knowledge management in the 21st century? And I'm going to take you through a couple of slides first, and then we'll go into, well, we have a break. I think they brought everything in, and then we'll go into the discussion. I was going to say, well, there's some slides before it.
This is the first one.
The first slide.
Yeah, this is the first slide.
And go to the next. That's okay. Bear in mind that I don't have my glasses, so I can't see that far, but I'm trying to. Bear in mind that these questions, remember we started with webinars. And what we also want to do is not lose what we gained in those webinars, because there were quite a few people participating. And the common questions on question 2, what we learned, you're going to have to bear with me for a second, because I'm actually going over here. What we learned is there's a strong consensus that experience and skills are critical competencies, not just knowing KM, but being able to do, okay? We also learned that theory is important, but given that KM is an applied discipline, practice is a key competency. There's also a consensus that a successful KM professional understands both the art and the science of KM, the hard and the soft sides of KM. And then last but not least, KM professionals in strategic positions need to have several types of intelligence to succeed. So that might even feed into some of the things that we've been talking about. What are your thoughts about competencies of KM professionals in organizations today?
I think one of the issues I'd like to bring up in this space is, I think it begins with a structural problem. So I'm going to speak sort of from a shell perspective, because I think it may fit what some of you have experienced. I have 8 people on my knowledge management team, and none of them have any background in knowledge management other than what they've been taught inside of the organization. So I think that's the first problem, right? Because when you only get taught internally, you don't bring that academic perspective that you learned in school, or that grounding in theory, or those practicums where you've got to look at lots of case studies and see how knowledge management was effectively integrated in other settings. So it's very limiting. I mean, we require professional reading and stuff like that to help people bolster their skills. But I think a competence discussion is almost premature without a little bit of structural adjustment, so that we can bring in the kind of people at the kind of grades and salaries where we can actually attract people who have these skills and have this foundational underpinning of theory and education, because I think that is very helpful. At the same time, I think it's a great idea to have people who also are from the operational side of the business and really know the business well and teach them. So I think we've got to really deal with that structural issue. I hear people talking about graduate programs, but I have roles where a person with a master's degree would not work for that salary. So it's not really a feeder pool to create people who will come into this business. And then finally, there's only 22 of us globally in Shell, 109,000 employees in 104 countries, and we have 22 people who do knowledge management as a full-time job. So again, I think this is part of the structural discussion that you can't escape when you talk about competence. So
I have a comment to kind of build on that, and that's the tension between the knowledge management discipline and the domain discipline, and the idea of whether or not it's more valuable, for instance, in that I work in the government sector, to understand the business as opposed to having the knowledge management competencies. And it's really the intersection between the domain knowledge or the business knowledge and the knowledge management knowledge, and which comes first. And a lot of the times, because there's not that many people that are really trained in true knowledge management, we start with the people in the domain. And I think that's what really brings us to the question of what type of people or what type of competencies should we be looking at within these people before we choose them to bring them into these roles. Because sometimes people kind of fall into these positions, and as a result, they potentially have the opportune moment to get the job, but unfortunately there's not a lot of thought put into whatever their educational or experiential background is as to whether or not they'll be the type of people that kind of take to this work. if it's something where they need to build their knowledge management competency because they already hold the domain competency.
I just want to add to that, but before that, I want to kind of a little bit backtrack a little bit about our understanding of knowledge management. The biggest problem, it's the same when designing an educational program, master degree, or even just coming up with a course for knowledge management. The people always wonder, what should we teach? What types of things we should focus on? And in any profession, profession is supposed to be about problem solving. And the question is, what problems are we solving by knowledge management? Is knowledge management just because of the lack of a better term that we call knowledge management? Because the first things comes to the mind when you talk about knowledge management is knowledge and managing what's inside the people's head and that sort of thing. And it got really complex and complicated and that sort of thing. To me, the knowledge management is, or the focus of knowledge management, on two things. One is the knowledge processes, and the other one is the knowledge practices, which is some of the processes will be things like knowledge creation, transfer, acquisition, discovery, knowledge organization, knowledge retention, and I think the biggest one that I always focus on is knowledge utilization, because a lot of organizations spend lots of money on fertilizing knowledge, but they don't make money out of it, and it just walks out of the door, and someone else makes money. I mean, we've seen that happen again and again with organizations having people just walk out and start a magnet company, and they did not take advantage of that. So knowledge utilization is one big aspect of it. And then you have those knowledge practices, which things like best practices, knowledge sharing, communities of practice, learning organizational, professional development, and so on. And the question is, what type of problems are we trying to solve? And therefore we can figure out what competencies we need, because if we know what is the problem, we can devise the solution. And this question about competencies is a difficult question, because if I would know what competencies people need to do the right thing, it probably would be a quick fix, but it is not. And it's not only particular to the knowledge management domain, but I think it's also to any profession. There's always this issue of finding out what do we need to do so that we have an edge and compete. And that's a big question in the mind of every organization, is what do we need to do to compete and to stay at the forefront. We need to do to compete and to stay at the forefront of technology, innovation, and that sort of things. The other aspects, I think that the tension between practitioners and researchers and scientists, there's always that tension, and we actually started the International Conference on Knowledge Management to bring these people together so they can talk. Because a lot of practitioners don't think what the researchers and the scientific doing has any relevance, and the scientific people think that practitioners are just going around talking and nobody's doing anything serious. And we try to kind of put them together and get them to actually talk, because there is really no profession if it's not grounded in research and science. You have to have a research on science. You have to have real problems, complex problems. You really have to have a solution to those problems, and in order for practitioners to be able to do something meaningful, to apply it in the real world. So we need these two things to come together. And we kind of know some of those things that need to be happening in terms of, based on our experience, of what the type of thing that knowledge professionals, and here there is this distinction between knowledge professionals and knowledge workers. knowledge workers, everybody is a knowledge worker, no matter what they do. You know, they get up in the morning, they open their eyes, they see something that's knowledge. So everybody is a knowledge worker, but not everybody is a knowledge professional. They would kind of draw that distinction because we have right now transformation that's taking place in a big field, which is library science. Library science is changing in a big way. Libraries are changing in a big way. And there is a transformation in that discipline. And to me, that the only way that discipline is heading is toward knowledge management.